We are out of practice for the show. Uh-oh. I have Jane twice and Leroy not at all. How does
Uh-oh.
that happen? Leroy, you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, that's weird. I got Jane on here twice. I guess, whatever. Oh, now I've only got you. That's unfortunate. I'm just cycling through our pictures now. Everybody's going to see all the exciting things going on here. I'm just doing this. This is awesome. This is a great little oddity. Oh, there we go. Hey, I'm in the middle now. Normally Jane's in the middle. Now I'm in the middle. This is like the Brady Bunch. I was doing this little swappy thing that you guys can't see that because you're coming in through the other way. But everyone watching this, like I saw swiping and our faces jumping around. That was exciting. All right. Hey, we are here off the cuff. And as Jane said, we are
This is
out of
fun.
practice for doing
Yeah.
our group ones. And so life has been crazy for everybody. How you guys doing? Everything? I mean, I know Jane, you've been all kinds of craziness going on in your life. But you made it today.
I made it. Yep.
Yeah,
Crazy stuff in the past 3 weeks, but I am here and alive and doing well.
yeah. Well, I've been praying for you a lot. No, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, man. Mm. How about you, Leroy? How's life treating you?
Good. We're really good. I mean, the weather isn't too hot yet, so I mean, sunny California. What can you say?
Can't complain. I was in Florida and oh gosh,
It's probably hot.
humidity, heat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
Now, are you driving around to these places, or are you flying to these places?
Well, it's not a false dichotomy. It's both.
Hmm. Mm.
Oh gosh. So it's weird. I mean, we had some flights going on for us and for our family, and it was weird. Like just dropping our kids off in an airport to visit family, and just it's just a weird time to even. As I feel, it's a different kind of weird than it was after 9/11. Where you had to fly, and it was just sort of like it's just now. I don't know. I can't even describe it, but yes, you're big into. Yeah, that was neat, Leroy. How you zoomed your head in there. All right. Well, hey, we are gonna look today. We're picking up. We're gonna go through really a series of discussions, sort of apologetic topics and issues that I know come up with a lot of people. And originally, today's show started out. We were going to answer this question about what about the people who have never heard the gospel. And so I started to doing some looking into that. And one of the things I came across was a lot of again this year. I mean, there's all every month it seems like this last couple of years. There's always these deconversion stories. People deconstructing their faith, right? And people who are just re-examining. They grew up Christian and now they're stepping away. And there's artists and there's musicians. There's people who've authored books. There's academics, and these all there's pastors, and they all make the press because it's see, Christianity is false because these people step away. And so I know that sort of like before we got into this question of what about those who've never heard, I thought, well, maybe it's more relevant we look at these deconstruction stories first, say how do we as Christians approach those. And today we're going to look at sort of the title of the show is Deconstructing Lisa Gunger. And so she's part of the Michael Gunger band. And it's not really so much about picking on Lisa Gunger. I want people to understand that. This is not a negative thing about her, but I think her story exemplifies the story of many other people. It's also different than a lot of other people. So, but I think she has some uniquenesses to her story that put it sort of in a little category that I think there are people who share what she's gone through. And so if there's Christians out there, if you're struggling with those things, or if you know people, if there's family who are struggling with those things, man, this is a great opportunity to kind of think through like, okay, how do these deconstruction stories work? How's that going to look? So with that, I thought maybe start off even as, hey, do you guys, what are some of your own stories of sort of maybe deconstructing your faith? Have you guys ever gone through that process yourself of figuring out, okay, who am I? What's my faith? Where am I at? Has that been a part of your journey?
Well, became a believer later on in life, so it was kind of at the beginning. I was already really researching a lot of things, and that's why apologetics was so important to me. It's like, is this really real?
Mm,
So it was more like I came to faith and then I was learning about it. So I don't think I really ever had a point where I was deconstructing my faith
Hmm.
because I was already searching for the answers. And yeah, so I've never really deconstructed. But I mean, there's always been doubts like, well, if this isn't really true, then why should I be following? Those kind of thoughts come into my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What about you,
I
Leroy?
can't say that I was ever there. I mean, from I think the time I was 5 years old, and I honestly mean when I was 5 years old, I kind of figured out two things, and this is probably the oldest thought about the faith that I have since I was around that time, 1972. I said to myself, if there are weak things in the world, somewhere there's the weakest, and if there's strong things in the world, somewhere there's the strongest. If there's good things in the world, somewhere there's the most good, and if there's bad things in the world, somewhere there's the most bad. And I just reconciled from that point. There must be a God, and there must be a devil. And from that, I think from that point, I've always believed that the world was really framed, you know, that way because it just fit the way the world works. And I don't think I've ever questioned it ever.
So just to
I
understand that,
can't
Leroy,
recall
you thought all those things at 5?
at 5 years old.
You
I'm going
were
to tell you
a
right now, that's the
amazingly
oldest thought.
genius 5-year-old, man.
I don't think I was
Mm.
amazingly genius, but I will tell you, I was reading a book on Anselm, and Anselm framed one of his arguments the same way,
No,
and I
you were
rocked that to
reading
my
Anselm
core.
at 5? I'm starting to not
No,
believe
this
it.
is like a few years ago. This
Oh,
is a few
okay,
years
okay.
ago.
Because you were
But
starting to lose me at that point. I don't think anyone's
I
going to
would
believe
have, yeah,
that.
I would have lost myself. I wish I had started reading Anselm at 5, but I will just tell you, those, I just remember being really young and looking at the world and saying, none of this makes sense. None of it makes sense in and of itself. It just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense unless there's some grand conductor, behind it all. It just never made sense without that. Other than that, I mean, how else could we all order our lives if there's really nothing bigger than all of us that makes sense of everything that happens? I mean,
Huh.
that's how I thought of those things.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect. I mean, for your stories, it's interesting. I feel like I had my sort of I mean, I guess today's language, I'd call it a deconstruction, reconstruction kind of thing. I mean, when I was a student at Penn State, I came in as a pretty naive kid. I wasn't exposed to a lot of stuff, but man, my roommates would party like 4 or 5 nights a week, and I had roommates that, I mean, literally would have sex with their girlfriends while I was in the room trying to sleep. All kinds of things would go on, and I was like, this was very challenging to my not only just my naivete, but just to my Christian faith. I was like, I had a roommate, a friend across the hall named Bukhari, and he was Muslim, and he would always make fun of my three-headed God. I didn't even know what that meant, so I started this whole thing like, who is God? I remember going through the journey of like asking myself many years into this, my schooling, how is it that I can even dare to say that I know that there's truth of Christ when there's so many, like the question we're going to ask next week, when there's so many people who've never heard. I remember just wrestling with that because of all my friends there. And so while I was committed, I never walked away, but I had lots of doubts and I had lots
Sure.
of
But
fears and
can I
concerns. Yeah.
can I say something was very interesting? See, you were in a context where people were asking those kind of questions, right?
Yeah.
You really were, and they were living they were making claims on one hand and living outside of those claims on the other hand. See, I didn't grow up in that kind of context. I didn't grow up in the context where people were asking those kind of questions. So it was probably easy for me to kind of skate through for a large period of my life without ever really, bumping into those sort of issues. As a matter of fact, I would venture to say that I didn't really begin to think about the questions until I was probably around 36 years old, and then only in the context of, a mere Christianity. But the questions that were being answered in that way only affirmed what I'd already believed. They weren't really questioning it from, is this really true sort of thing. So as I read C.S. Lewis, I mean, I was pretty much saying, yep, this is the way the world works. This is real. This guy really has it, because that's exactly how I've experienced it. So I wasn't really around people like that until long after I was really affirmed in what I believe.
Yeah. So I kind of resonate, at least personally, a little bit with these sort of challenges. Although I think I'm still very different in some ways. I think they all are a little unique, and that's again why I said, when we're talking about deconstructing Lisa Gunger, it's not to pick on this woman and just her experience, but I think it just illustrates some of the ways that people travel this journey. So for me, the framework that I kind of wanted us to use today a little bit, though, we're going to show some clips. She had an interview on the Unbelievable radio show. This is back in 2019 of fall. There's been more recent cases, studies that they've done on these things, or, interviews of different folks. But I found hers was interesting. But I think the framework to look at some of these clips was really out of Matthew 13. 1 through 23 is this whole story. Jesus tells this parable of the sower. And I know you guys are familiar with it. Let me just read a couple verses out of this. I'm not going to read all the 23 verses, just the first 6 or so here. But then Jesus he told them many things in parables. He was talking all this stuff. And he says this, here he tells this parable. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell along the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among the thorns and grew up and choked by the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil where it produced a crop, 160, 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let him hear. And so I actually think the parable of the sower is a pretty good biblical framework for understanding what does it mean when we talk about deconstruction. Because I think it's really a lot more simple than we think. I think it's really simple that these are people who have heard the gospel. They've received it in some way, whether with some sort of joy. But there are things that Jesus said would come and choke out or scorch the gospel. So these aren't new. He warned about these things, right? Does that make sense to you guys? You think that's a pretty good framework for looking at these things?
Well, I think that's dead on. I mean, Jesus said it though.
Well, Leroy, I got to tell you, Mike just jumped on. He said, "You are looking good," by the way. So I don't know what it is about you. Probably it's that better lighting, and all that concealer makeup you've been using lately.
Yeah, I mean, there's this saying, about fine wine, what happens as it gets, older, that sort of thing. I'm kind of resonating with that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're living it out. You're living the dream. Your wife is living the dream, is what I really am trying to say.
No, that is really the truth. She really is living the dream or a nightmare.
Oh man. So hey, all right, let's look here. So I want to show this first clip with that framework in mind. I think there's a lot of financial. When we listen to these stories of deconstruction, again using Lisa Gunger as just this example, it's really interesting because Jesus said talk about when he's explaining what this parable means. He says how these financial needs and the worries and cares of the world choke out the joy of the gospel, right? And I think that's what I hear a little bit in this clip, but I want to play it and see what you guys think. She's here expressing her feelings of fear regarding her doubts and the potential loss of income as she's contemplating this, leaving the faith. Okay, so here we go.
Time. Yeah, I was terrified. We had a young daughter. We had started a church in Denver, and I didn't know. Yeah, everything we were doing. That's how we were surviving, even financially. So it felt like everything was falling apart.
Yeah, so she's here. Yeah, everything's falling apart. If she walks away, her whole livelihood. What do you guys think when you listen to that? What did you hear in her story?
Well, I remember when they kind of had their crisis moment. And the question that immediately came to my mind was, did they have a well-rounded and grounded theology in the very first place? Mm-hmm. And listening to them, and this particular tape kind of adds a little bit more insight into it. I don't think that they did. I don't think that they did from the very outset. And now they're dealing. I don't want to be callous and say they're dealing with the consequences, because the consequences came from not having that well-rounded theology before they stepped into the worship field to do worship for people. It's not just music. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know,
So it kind of
people
says
expect you to
something-
believe.
Yeah, so what you're saying, and I hadn't really thought of it that way, but what you're kind of saying is, hey man, before you step into these roles of leading and music and public where everyone starts to ask you these questions, maybe we need to make sure that people are a little more better grounded so that when they face all these challenges, they're not feeling the pressure to walk away, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this started when someone challenged their understanding of creation. They were more, as I recall, they were more, evolution-based or theistic evolution-based, which was the ground root of where all their issues began. I mean, and it blossomed into other things after that. But, I mean, not having that settled, and not recognizing the audience that you're dealing with, that most people believe that is, that's scripture and it ought to be believed, and not having that settled or a good way of working it out and discussing with people left them in a really bad position, where they were particularly injured.
So, hey, I want to say this before. Hey, while I put up a post from Mike here, you might want to close your door, Leroy. Your wife left, and she left that open. I can hear everybody in your household. But while
No,
Leroy,
that's not here.
That's your door behind you. I hear your wife. But
no, they're all upstairs.
But while he does that, Jane, I just wanted to know, Mike also said you and I are looking good too. I don't think he wanted us to feel left out. So I just wanted
Mike,
to point that.
we appreciate it. We're aging like fine wine too.
Yes, that's what my wife thinks. Well, I used to be a lot fatter, so I lost 70 pounds since 2015. So my wife thinks she's like, hey, this is really good for me. She's like, I'm better off now than I was 5 years ago. I'm like, yeah, you are. That's right.
70 pounds. That's a lot. What did you do?
He's right.
Just ate better and worked out. That's all it is. I deconstructed my lifestyle of eating.
Okay.
So yeah, that's good. Just to tie it into the show, But Jane, I wanted to have you jump in, but let me throw this other clip out real too, because I know you guys saw this little Hawk Nelson one, and this is a more recent one. So Hawk Nelson, he was another Christian singer. Or Hawk Nelson was the band, right? Yeah, I'm saying Hawk Nelson is the band. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. I wrote it down and then I forgot it. Anyway, so this is the guy that was the kind of lead guy for Hawk Nelson, and in this he's talking about earning a living as a Christian, quote unquote, singer, and then finally just sort of feeling this liberty to doubt once he moved through that. So let me pop in this one, and Jane, we'll get you to talk about this as well.
While I was doing Hawk Nelson, I think anytime I had a doubt or a question, I was so terrified of it because it threatened my livelihood, right? And my social relationships and my family relationships. And I was so scared of finding myself in this position where I'd have to get up on stage and sing something that I didn't believe, that I think I just stuffed those questions and doubts down for a long time and didn't let myself think about it. And eventually, for other reasons, we started taking a sort of steps back from the band. My wife and I had some kids. All of us sort of developed different careers, and I found myself in a place where my financial well-being, my livelihood no longer depended on Hawk Nelson as much. And so I didn't have to be a Christian to make a living anymore. And then it hit me one day, if I don't have to believe in God, do I?
Yeah, I think that words at the end, he's like, he just hit him one day. It's like, if I don't have to believe in God, do I?
Exactly.
I think that's a fascinating question. What do you think about that, Jane? What does that say about our culture, maybe, and the change that's going on, with these Christian artists or even pastors, whatever, feeling this pressure to earn, stay faithful because that's how they make a living. And what do you think?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit more convenience. It's like, what do I get out of this? I think sometimes want to see is like, well, if I follow God, I might lose a lot of things. I mean, Christianity says you're going to lose a lot of things if you follow Christ. And so I think when you become a Christian, that it says to count the cost. And so I don't think sometimes as Christians, we don't realize what that cost can mean to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of listened to this and I was thought, I actually am, the fact that I think, we've been able to monetize our faith, and I don't think that is inherently bad, but maybe the transition in our culture is working to the benefit, because I think we've had a lot of people who have culturally just been able to make a living, and, because they've had this sort of culture-based faith, and they just sort of fit in with the culture. So, hey, I have a talent. I'm just going to make some money off this. And they've never really thought deeply about why they believe or what they believe from the sounds of it. Again, maybe I'm not saying that's everybody in this case, but, especially the Hawk Nelson dude just seemed to be saying like, man, I never, all of a sudden I realized, now that I don't have to believe this anymore, do I really want to believe this? I don't know. I actually thought that that's at least, I think it's a better place for our culture to be if people can be more honest about what they really believe and why they believe it. So I don't see this as a negative trend. I think we're really figuring out who are the sheep and who are the goats, so to speak, and who's following. If that makes sense.
This is a good question, and part of it is people don't recognize how deeply the secular world has infiltrated church culture. I mean, maybe we don't think about it, but I mean, they're not the first guys to do it. This goes all the way back with Jeremy Stapp and Creed. Who once they started to taste success, they really didn't need the church that really catapulted them into the spotlight. This goes on with other authors who go on television programs and are forced to make compromising statements in order to maintain popularity. Statements that they know are anti-biblical, or to feign ignorance. But this goes all the way back to the Edict of Milan. So right after the Edict of Milan, where Constantine said that the church could get their property back and their businesses back, and the church became almost a state religion, you had all these people, that joined the church and wanted to be part of the clergy, and it kind of diluted the thing. And I think we're just seeing the remnants of that even in our time. I'm just saying that what we're seeing is not without precedent. I'm not saying that it's not serious and not an issue, but I'm saying it's not without precedence. I just think that many times we're just shocked when we listen to our beloved worship leaders and bands, and we find out that they had other motives or other drivers that were for their. I think that's the shock to us all.
Yeah, I've had some. Oh, go ahead, Jane.
Especially when they have big platforms, I always wonder why people look to these people. I mean, like, they don't really have theological backgrounds and stuff like that. And so when people look at worship leaders as people who are the experts, or I'm just like, that's kind of not who we should look to. We need to go back to scripture. I mean, it's like,
we're not dissing worship leaders. We're just saying, you need to really listen to what they say theologically rather than how they sing. I mean, how well they sing.
I think that's it's maybe a side point in this, but a lot of people have pointed out for years, a lot of these groups, and I'm not specifically thinking about Lisa Gunger here or Hawk Nelson particularly, but a lot of the worship stuff we hear is pretty superficial stuff. It doesn't have a lot of depth. It's mostly narcissism with the veil of Jesus. It's very self-centered, man-centered stuff. And a lot of us have for a long time said, hey, there's nothing wrong with stylistically with pop worship music. I mean, it's okay to not play it on an organ or whatever, who cares? But if there's no substance there, maybe it's because the people writing it don't have a substantive faith. And I think that's actually what we're kind of finding out now, is that, these were songs coming from people who didn't really have a deep faith. And when the challenges from the world, like Jesus warned, hey, look, you have the gospel, you have this joy, but you've got these concerns and these things that are stifling your faith, and the gospel gets choked out. And if we were a little more cautious, I think we'd see that their music reflected that concern. And maybe we just haven't done a good job as a church helping our artists and helping those people who are in those platforms make sure that they are grounded. I mean, earlier Mike said, Mike was saying how this is why everybody kind of needs a group of people, a solid support group around them. You know, he was saying that earlier, and I think maybe it applies here, is that like we need maybe some people, pastors, to do a better job of saying, look, I'm glad you're this platform, but let's talk about what you believe, you know, before they get to this point where it gets choked out, you know? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point. I can think of there was a movie that came out, and I think the actor's name was Jeremy Sisto, and he played Jesus in this movie. It was a contemporary movie, probably in the early 2000s, maybe earlier than that. And they played this song during by LeAnn Rimes, when LeAnn Rimes was really like the one, and that was part of the music. And at the end of the movie, it's a 2-part series. This Jeremy Sisto Jesus character is walking around in modern day New York, and to LeAnn Rimes' song. Well, LeAnn Rimes' song became this really big hit seller, but when it finally made the video for it, there was just a ball of light flowing around the house. I mean, and it was, and there were no reference. You could see now that what you thought was a reference to Jesus and God was really not a reference to Jesus or God. It was just a ball of light, you know, floating around the room. Not anything serious. And I just thought to myself back then that we need to be serious about the words to our songs, and they need to be theological. There need to be some deep theology in the music. It doesn't all have to be a mighty fortress is our God, you know. It doesn't have to be all that. I mean, but it should have some, like, you know, some ruggedness, you know, some blood and the cross, you know, that whole thing. And I don't think that I find it hard to listen to some of these songs. And I know my wife would probably pinch me now, but I hate most of these songs that they sing because they're not really singing about anything serious. It's not anything serious. It's psychological mumbo jumbo most of the time. And that's just, you know, that's just how I think about it. I know that not many people are going to be processing it that way. That may just be a defect in me. But I listen to these songs and I don't feel.
I would always assume that.
I'm
if given the choice, that's my constant assumption.
I'm willing to say that. But I listen to these songs and they don't inspire me. As a matter of fact, I just have to sit on my hands because, I mean, some of the lyrics in these songs are just ridiculous. And it's like you said, who is writing them? Who's writing them? The one writing them does not have, I don't think, a seriously deep theology in the first place.
Sure. Okay, well, let's...
Is this a...
Okay, Jane.
Oh, okay.
No, you go ahead anytime.
You know, when Kanye West came out with his gospel album, I was listening to it. I was like, wow, some of the lyrics in here are a lot deeper than some of the worship music that I hear. And I was so shocked. And
I know.
I actually enjoyed his album. And I was like, he gets theology right in a lot of his songs. And I'm like, okay, this guy's I guess a new believer, but like he gets it. And then we have these worship leaders who sing songs about how they worship God, or it's about me and this is my worship, where it's not centered on who God is, what Christ has done. And so I was just like, whoa, this is crazy. Kanye West with a gospel album.
I listened to it and said the same thing. I was really struck by the same thing, that this guy who you don't really want to take serious, but when you listen to him, you're saying, you know, this dude is articulating a faith in the lyrics of his music that seems robust. You know, that's very thoughtful. You know, so go figure.
Hey, well, by the way, before I move on to this little clip here, Mario, Leroy, man, you're getting all the kudos. He said you were dead on. Not about what you were saying right before Jane said, you know, just about your idea of the worship lyrics, all that other kind of stuff. So Mario thinks the defect is not in you. So that's one Mario for you, me against you. That's a tie. So maybe somebody else has a weigh in on that. We'll see. I don't know. But right now it's just a tie. So the jury's out whether
But you know what I was gonna. You know what's very interesting, and this is a more nuanced but a very, very important topic that we're having, because what we're seeing, you know, church-wide is, I think, weakness. I don't want to say failure, but I want to say weakness in our discipleship. And part of that weakness is displayed in the music that we listen to, what we call worship, part of that weakness is displayed there. And really what we're getting at, even with all the people that you're bringing up, is a lack of theological depth and discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Because their desires are not really to see God glorified. It was to really make it. You know, and the money allowed them the autonomy to say one or the other. And they're just being honest now. Whereas before, they probably didn't have space to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't want to go too much farther down the rabbit hole of music, although that really could be a whole thing that we could discuss at some point down the road, just like, the music side of things and where our faith is at, and looking at that and what it's really the impact that it's had on the church and on discipleship process. But even in that discipleship stuff, a lot of that I think comes down to leadership. And I think when I listened to Lisa Gunger's story, it put me back in the mind of this parable that Jesus told. And, I think oftentimes Christian leadership acts like the weeds that choke out the gospel. And let me see, it's the church itself that really stifles people from internalizing and deepening their faith. So let me play this clip and see if you guys agree with my assessment on that. Okay, here we go.
Like most people have experienced, like the one place that they feel safe and it feels like their heart is opening. It can also have these really weird rules, and there can just be poisonous things where you don't see them. So there were some things I started questioning a little bit, but I was told you don't question. If you question the Bible, if you question the teacher or the pastor, then you're in essence sinning. So I kind of shut down any kind of questions that I had. But I also didn't really care that much. So,
right.
Though, because I don't want to disparage anyone.
Yeah, you better not. It's back on air now. You better not say that. So I'll say it though in a minute, Leroy. But I will. But so yeah, I thought that was interesting. Well, first, she kind of says, "Hey, these leaders told her, silence her. Don't say anything. Don't question us. Don't question the Bible. You're a bad person if you do it." And then she kind of closes with a little, "But I really wasn't that interested anyway." So I thought that was sort of an offhanded thing that was interesting. But yeah, what do you think about? I mean, is it really leaders then? Well, how do we understand these leaderships? I think maybe functioning like the weeds that Jesus warned about, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of young people I come across. I was at a mall one time, and I was at like a makeup counter, and I was talking to this young woman, and she found out I was a Christian, so she started asking me all these questions. And she said, my dad's a pastor, and I've asked him these questions, and all he's ever told me is like, just have faith. And I think that is so detrimental to a person's faith when you say, hey, just have faith. And then you're kind of telling them there really isn't any concrete answer that I could give you. You just have to accept this blindly. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people who have a faith that's more based on their experience rather than the grounding in the truth. And so I could see why a lot of people are just like, well, nobody ever has given me answers, and they always told me to just shut up and that's it. And it's like, well, why would they want to stay in the faith if there's no reason to?
Yeah. That's a good I remember I told you I was probably 36 when I read Mere Christianity. I wasn't really asking those questions.
Not 5 years old.
Yep, not at 5.
Okay.
I wasn't really asking those questions, but the moment I read that book, he articulated the answers to the questions that were churning in the background. So to the pastors who don't take the time to wrestle with their young believers in the faith, you know what they're going to hear? Their kids are going to go off to college, and I've seen this happen. Kids are going to go off to college, and they're going to actually learn some theology and get some of these questions answered. And they're going to come back and say to their pastor, "You lied to me. I've seen it happen. I know for a fact that it's happened. You lied to me." Not because the pastor wasn't equipped, but because he didn't want to take the time to teach these things. And the most interesting thing about Lisa Gunger was that there was something driving the original questions, right? There was some desire to drive the original questions. Now imagine if someone would have answered her questions in a legitimate way, then maybe she doesn't end up where she is in this place right now. I'm not trying to blame. I'm just trying to say if you don't get those questions answered, they're going
Yeah.
to be met in some other way.
Yeah, that's really the key, and maybe for her, the pointing to the leaders as an excuse. I don't know. I mean, I don't know her heart. I don't know where she's at. Uh, but I do think she points to a truth, though, that there are a lot of, like, okay, the two traditions that I'm more familiar with, that I've seen this happen a lot, where I've been in church, is one is Pentecostalism, which nobody else here probably would say, but uh, but also in the black church. Both
Yes.
those traditions are very strong
Yes.
on the authority. Do not touch the Lord's anointed. I am the pastor. I'm the
Yeah.
leader. I've been sent by God, and you never question that authority. And there's different reasons. Now, theologically, there's different reasons that those two traditions come to that place. But in my experience, in both of those traditions, in churches I've been in both those backgrounds, all those things do stifle legitimate, like, hey, I'm doubting. What does this mean? How do I integrate this? And because, like you said, Leroy, pastors are either they don't have answers, so they're afraid, or they think doubt is the opposite of faith. It's not.
Right.
Denial is the opposite of faith, but doubt is not the opposite. Doubt is a healthy part of faith. But when you have leaders incapable of guiding people, maneuvering them through that process, I think that's what you end up with, folks in Lisa Gunger's position, where she's not getting questions answered, and so those doubts linger, and she's just told to, sit in the back of the bus, be quiet, don't say anything, and then over a lifetime they build up, and eventually somebody else gives her an answer that leads her away from any kind of faith, because she assumes the church never had an answer. I mean, if that makes sense.
And there are consequences for that. There are consequences for that. For failure to answer those questions. There are consequences for that. And people live lives that get choked out by some other thing. That parable comes, truer and truer in every sense. Yeah. The cares of this world will choke out the gospel. That for the Christian, for the believer, for the non-believer, is the most difficult, because we live in the world. We have an in-depth experience with the material. What we don't have an experience with, or at least one that is less objective, is with the immaterial world. And so our default setting is to default to the material things. The needs to be met. I have an interesting story. Well, I won't tell it. I'll move on. I don't want to.
Oh man, you said it.
I went to sniper school in 1989, and when you graduate from Marine Corps sniper school, there's a field week that you had, and in field week, you're up 24 hours a day. You never sleep during field week. It's so much so that you're having daytime delusions. But I barely passed that school. I graduated from it, but I barely passed it because I didn't do all those things that were available to me during field week. I didn't take advantage of all the points. I didn't take advantage of all the opportunities to make my graduation sure. So the whole time it was really tenuous. And I always look back on that from a spiritual perspective, because, the world is, the spiritual life that we have is the same thing. There's so many opportunities that God gives us to engage with him spiritually in the world, to see him move mightily. And we're not guided in this place where we could take advantage of it, and it becomes more real to us. So we flounder and we linger and we languish, and our default setting begins to become the natural way that we see the world. So I would venture to say that for Lisa Gunger, if she's just like a normal person, she's very gifted, very talented, married a very talented husband. They probably were idealistic, probably had a real, I don't want to judge their faith, but it's probably real, or at least it seemed real to them. But when the difficulties came, they had no experience, no objective reality to appeal to, and then they were left to their own devices.
Yeah, that's a good lead in. Let's look to this next kind of area I wanted to look at in a couple clips. I think a lot of times faith is stranded, as you said, on that rocky soil. The sun comes out and it scorches it because it didn't have a depth of root to help it sustain these sort of intensity of the sun. Faith is stranded at that time when it's built on emotionalism or experientialism. Not emotions or experience being bad, but emotionalism and experientialism being like the core of the faith. And I think in this clip here with Lisa Gunger, she talks about her faith as a child, but you might want to notice, I'll just say this for everyone listening, notice that in her faith journey, she never once tells a story about faith in Jesus Christ. I found that really interesting part of this, but hear what you guys think of this little clip.
So I grew up a pretty mystical kid. I always believed that there was, or I always felt, I guess, didn't know what belief was at that point, but I felt there was always, I don't know, something that I couldn't see, and like a voice, a presence with me. And so I grew up believing that God just was. And then my parents were Baptists and Methodists for a while. And then my mom and I found this really charismatic church, and people were running down the aisles and waving flags. And it looked really exciting to me after being in a church that I was just falling asleep. And though like my family,
I love their song, He Makes Beautiful Things. That's one of my favorite songs.
Oh yeah. So
the one
yeah,
that
so
just says that over.
Go ahead. So we're back, by the way. I'm just warning you guys.
Okay, I was like, yeah, go ahead, never mind.
No, go ahead and say it. I should have not said anything. I made you say something, and then you wouldn't even know. I'm gonna do that next time.
I was talking about how I've actually been to one of their concerts, and it was a very different experience for me. I've never quite seen concerts like that before.
What was I've never been to one of theirs, so I can't say anything about it. So what was different?
Are
you going to say or no?
I will. I mean, the first church I ever really went to was Southern Baptist. So, they're a little more conservative in their worship. Sometimes they'll clap their hands or whatever. But I went to one of the Gunger concerts, and there were people like twirling around and falling down. And it was a very lively worship.
Yeah. Yeah. I resonated with that. I mean, I have stories, and I'll link to a couple on the show notes at themorethancake.org after this, so people can see that there's this guy who was a former Pentecostal pastor. He had an article in the New York Times about his journey walking away, but it reminded me a lot of her story there. Just this sort of her and her grew up in the church, and they were this group or that group, but then she found this in her case a Pentecostal place, and she just felt like God was there, and she just felt this passion, and she felt like they had something nobody else had. But again, I just am so fascinated. None of that was ever tied to a conviction of the gospel, and none of it is ever tied to a confession of faith in Jesus Christ as Savior. I mean, that's her words. I don't know, maybe that was a part of another thing, but I find it interesting when asked to tell her story, she didn't include anything about the person of Christ himself. I don't know. Am I reading too much into that, you think, or is that significant?
Nope. I think it's very significant. Jane, you want to go, or do you want me to? I don't want to.
Oh, it's important. I mean, Jesus is a big part of the Christian faith, and if that's left out,
what do you have?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What's very interesting? I was thinking about this yesterday. The role of emotions are important because just about everything we do to satisfy some desire or some get some emotional experience. Even though it's a physical act, at bottom is the deep contentment or satisfaction or love or some feeling that we're really aiming at and getting. And so we can see that feeling that like I said, in our default setting that we're aiming at becomes for a lot of people the reality, the really real. Whereas I think back to myself at 5 years old, I was in a phone booth outside of a store on G.C. Murphy's on Woodland Avenue, 58th and Woodland Avenue, maybe 60th and Woodland Avenue, I was at the store, and I remember going in there, and we found this thing called a chick tract. Now, if you've ever read a chick tract, you should read a chick tract. Chick is a guy who used to produce these little black tracts, and they were all, at the end, you're going to hell if you don't believe in God. But I remember reading this chick tract called This Was Your Life. And the chick tract is set up into two different features. One with the guy wanting to build barns and bigger barns, and how he lived for that consummation of wealth and everything. And then that guy dies and goes to hell. But then they give you, this could be your life, where this guy now is not living for those things. He's living for the Lord. And I remember sitting in the back of my mother's Mustang that day and thinking, I do not want to go to hell. I thought that it was a real place and that 5-year-olds go there, you know. And but you might say that at bottom there may have been fear motivating, but the fear wasn't just fear of hell. It was missing out on what was true and what was real and what was right. And I think that's kind of the difference. One satisfies our carnal selves, and the other one satisfies this deep calling that we have to be reconciled to God. Yeah. And I don't think that the people who deal with it emotionally are dealing with it with this deep call to reconcile with God. I think it's really about them and about how they feel and the satisfaction of their own desires and emotions in the moment. And when faced with these really real questions, man, now you're in the sea, you're in the soup, and now you got to figure out how do you swim, sink or swim. And they don't have anything to hold on to at that point. So,
yeah, I think that's that kind of bridges into the next little clip I wanted to show. And I'm actually going to skip one. I'll just kind of frame it. So, Lisa Gunger was talking about, again, this sort of reasons that drew her away and why she ended up, kind of moving away from, Christian faith, her historic faith, or that she grew up with. And she lists the sort of things like I had a problem with the doctrine of hell. Why would God, create a place that people would be tortured, and why would he create people that could be sinful, and doesn't that make him a moral, evil God? LGBTQ issues that, of course, God has to be this. And those are maybe expected when we listen to stories like this. But, in this little clip I want to show, kind of after that, she talks about how when she's along this journey with her husband, and he was first said, okay, I'm an atheist. She's like, well, I don't know if I'm an atheist, I just don't believe in the historic faith, whatever. And she was wondering, their marriage is on the rocks, all these kind of questions and doubts. And she talks about not putting any moral expectations on her husband, because that's not like what love does. And so I kind of want to listen to this clip and then just kind of ask yourself this question: is the kind of love she describes really God's kind of love, the kind of biblical love that we see outlined in the scripture? So kind of think about that question, as we go look at this clip number, clip number 6.
I think the moment he told me he was an atheist, that's really where I was like, well, I started questioning my own motives. What is love about if I'm expecting him to be a certain way, and that's why I love him? That felt like a shallow love to me. Yeah. So it really showed me my own heart and why I love, why I'm open to people. And
yeah, so that's, so again, in this clip, she's, in the other ones we didn't watch, she talked about how big God's love is. It's bigger than we think. That's why everybody needs to be included. But, here she's, again, expressing this concern, like, well, even if my husband, do I love him because he is a Christian? Or even if he changes, isn't my love shouldn't be bigger than expecting anything from him? So the question is that God's kind of love? What do you think?
I mean, God does love, but he also has ways that we should live out our lives. And so he doesn't just say, go do whatever you want. It's like, if you love me, you will obey me. And so there are parameters to love.
Feelings, love, and obedience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's very interesting about Lisa Gunger is I remember when this first happened, and the first thing that I read was that her husband didn't believe and that she was struggling. And then the next thing that I read was that she had followed after her husband. And when I saw this clip originally, I think this is really the issue with her. Her husband is the one who first walked away, the one who first announced his atheism, and I think that she was caught in a quandary, and this is how she worked that quandary out, which is to say, love doesn't require moral commitment. Well, she, in her mind, maybe she has to say that because she wants to save her marriage, and I think based on this statement and what was originally several years ago that this happened. Which is very interesting. And again, that's the cares of this world coming in and choking out the word. My wife and I say to each other when we counsel couples, when you stand before God, you will not stand there with your husband next to you or with your wife next to you. It'll be you and him. You will not be able to blame her. You will not be able to blame him. This thing is between you and him. And I think that's one of her big struggles here is her relationship with her husband. I think the finances part and the lifestyle issues, they all come into play as well. But I mean, this is just a very powerful topic. It really is, because it really gets down to the nib.
Yeah, Jane, I don't know if you remember a story. Ravi Zacharias told a story, and I couldn't find it. I was trying to remember this. Maybe you do. He was like counseling some businessman somewhere in Asia when he was traveling, and I don't remember where it was, but this guy was having trouble with his wife. Yeah, okay, maybe he doesn't tell you. You guys know this story? And
I know the story. He doesn't tell you.
Yeah, and he basically this. Maybe you should tell her, because I don't remember all the details, but I was thinking about that very story when she was saying this. Because I know Ravi's point would exactly address what she's kind of saying here. Do you remember some of the details? I'll fumble through it.
I remember some of the details. I couldn't tell the whole thing. But
the rough part of the story was, then just that this guy, Ravi had to point out the fact that, if your spouse cheats on you, we all have expectations. And there's nothing wrong with expectations. Love is not the absence of expectation. Love is the reason, actually, it's a constraint that puts on expectations. Good parents discipline their kids. It's the parents who don't discipline their kids because they don't love them. I usually tell my kids, look, I discipline you and I punish you because because I love you. And I don't want you to, if I don't want you to run out into the street in front of a car, when I see you bolting for it, I give you a swat in the butt, or take away a cookie, or whatever the heck it is, And they cry and they feel terrible. But I said, this is what love does. Love puts constraint because we know what's best for you as a parent. And in a marriage, love puts constraint. If I say to my wife, I choose you, and then I go and I cheat on my wife, well, then that's not love.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows it's not love because I wasn't faithful to my commitment. And so what Gunger has done here is what so many other people do. They say, well, God can put his love is boundless. Well, there's an equivocation of terms. Boundless, yes, in scope, and its strength and its power, but love creates boundaries that keep us safe from the things that aren't love. And I think she misses that point, that love is the only reason we have constraints on things to begin with, because love, we care about somebody so much, we're willing to say, hey, don't do this because this is going to be bad for you. This is going to harm you. And if you don't love somebody, say, yeah, go for it. What do I care? And that's the absence of love.
That's such an amazing explication, I think, of Ephesians 6, where the husband is told to love his wife as he loves himself. And then the husband is told not to frustrate his children. In both cases, the husband is to give of himself for the sake of his wife, to give of himself for the sake of his children. And then it says that slaves ought to obey their masters, not as eye pleasers when the master is looking, but because they want to glorify God. The slave does the work for the master, and we would say in common parlance, the employee goes to work for his employer, not in order to please his master, although you want to please the one who's in service you are, but because you want to glorify God. All these things, the one individual constricts his own rights for the sake of loving the Lord for the other person's sake, not for their own benefit. Sometimes to their own detriment that you do those things. And when she makes the statement that she makes, she is making something that sounds very good from a secular perspective. The kind of stuff that we listen to in music, that we see in movies, that we read about in books, but is anti-biblical. Absolutely against the very kind of real, robust, substantive love that God would have us love others, not for our benefit, but for their own benefit. I mean, it is the most, whiplashy thing I think I've ever heard in my entire life, at least right up there.
Yeah, Zachary on YouTube agrees with that thing we were just talking about love and constraints, and gave us a big old amen on that. Any thoughts on this one, Jane? Before I want to go to one, I have actually a couple clips left. I don't think we'll have time for both, but I want to hit one of them. But Jane, do you have anything on this point before we move on?
Nope. Go for that next clip.
Hey, okay, so I want to get to this one real quick. And when we get to, what about people who've never heard, maybe we can revisit some of these points here. But I think faith along the path, that Jesus talked about again in his parable, is consumed by the culture that denies truth. And this one is so relevant in our discussions of, critical theory, critical race theory, all these things that are going on in our world. But this clip is really interesting. She's talking about how, science, her understanding of science, wasn't welcomed in Christianity. Science wasn't welcomed in Christianity. But then notice in this second clip towards the end of the interview, what she says about science and her own faith. It's really interesting to see that. And see if you guys pick up on what I picked up on putting these clips together.
I mean, it seemed like science was not welcome in faith. So that was a big one for us. Like every good, great teacher and good guru, that's the thing, that you're given a riddle. You're given this thing that you try to figure out. You walk away and you have a journey or a lifetime trying to figure out the riddle. But the point is, we can so reside here in our head, trying to figure it out and thinking we can actually prove that God exists. And for me, like you can't. It's not a scientific thing you can pull apart and look under a microscope. So for me, it was all an undoing all the things that I know.
So that was interesting. I mean, like, okay, so the beginning clip, like I said, she goes on and says, hey, science wasn't welcome. I had these questions about the Bible. So science for her disconfirmed it, disproved the scripture to some degree. But then she's talking later about how, like, well, because she was being confronted, what about these facts and these evidences and all this stuff? She's like, well, but my faith, it's beyond those things. It can't be, you can't use science or, reason or faith to sort of disconfirm this, because this is something deep. It's holistic. And I just found that so fascinating that science can prove the Bible's wrong in a sense, but it could never prove that her new faith, whatever that means, is bad. Does that seem like a little off to you?
Yeah. Throughout the interview, she was like, some things are just unknowable, or she would just say, I don't know. But then, when you say, science is saying, well, this can't be true, but you said you can't really know what's true. So there's a little bit of foundational problems there.
Yeah. I think she revealed her whole structure of who she really thinks is God. She's God. She stands over and above science. She stands over and above the faith. She is her own God with a small g. She is the one who determines what's true and what's right and what love is. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, once you remove the real God from the picture, you're only left with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll save our final clip because our time's up. I don't want to go too much over here. But it's interesting. Maybe we'll play this clip next week or another show. But she talks about Paul had his own construct of truth and her construct of truth. Man, that language of critical theory is so dominant in her understanding of this, that there is no absolute truth. There is no ultimate meta-narrative or big truth that guides everything. Everybody's just
except the ultimate meta narrative. Except the ultimate meta narrative that there is no ultimate meta narrative.
Yeah. It's Yeah, Mario says bad theology, bad philosophy, bad science. She's got it all messed up. But so, hey, you know, final thoughts from both you guys on this idea of deconstructing. Lisa Gunger in this case, and what's your big takeaway for those listening, and maybe people either experiencing these things themselves, these kind of doubts, or if they have some friends that are walking through that. Any bit of advice?
I just think we need to take people's questions seriously. I've just met so many people who walk away from the faith because they are looking for these answers, and the people that they trusted most, their leaders, had nothing for them. And then by the time they do come across people who have sound answers, it's almost too late sometimes. Yeah. So I think we just really need to, I guess, encourage the church to, hey, we need to take this more seriously.
At younger ages, right? Yeah.
I think what you said is dead on. Her faith was untethered from the beginning. It was untethered from the truth of Scripture, from objective truth, obviously, and from the reality from reality. And when the trouble came, she had nothing to hold on to. And I think this is what is happening in our culture today, specifically with Christians who are, like you said, who are pursuing the CRT thing. The CRT thing is just exposing that they never really had a real foundation in the very beginning. And in the same way, when your livelihood is taken away and your prospects for a job are taken away, we read about these people in the scriptures. And those who remain are the ones who were really there in the beginning. And those who leave were never really there in the beginning. I really believe that. So that's my takeaway. I'm not angry with her. On one hand, I have empathy for her. And on the other hand, I got three hands here. On the other hand, I pray that someone would, in her life, who loves her, who loves the Lord, God would give them a voice in her life again.
Yeah. I'll just close with this. Mike said it earlier. I popped it up. I'll pop it up again. He said, of course, Lisa Gunger's journey isn't over. Right. That's the thing about doubts, is that, Christ died for us to save us from our sin, but he also saves us from our bad theology, our bad philosophy, and our bad science. Because none of us has a perfect. Now, I'm not saying that there's nothing core to the faith, or that there isn't such a thing as true apostasy and walking away. What I am saying is, we don't know what the Lord has in store for Lisa and her husband and others in this circumstance. And I hesitate in some sense to title this, Deconstructing Lisa Gunger, because it's not. I don't mean this to be an attack on her at all, but I do think she shared this story publicly, and it's worth looking at. That there's many people like this that are hurting and struggling for whatever reasons, and if you know people like that, don't take it as final. Take it as an opportunity to say, how can I continue to speak into their life and draw them back to the cross of Christ, and to continue to love them. Demonstrate Christ to them in a way that will hopefully overcome some of their fears and doubts, or whatever has caused them to step away. So I still have hope, and I still think until Jesus comes, we need to keep those people in our prayers and not savage them on the internet or all that other kind of stuff. So. Excuse me. Well, that's what I say. So, all right. Well, we're closing up. We'll be back next week. We're going to do next week. What about the people who've never heard? I'm looking forward to that topic. I know Jane was excited about that, so she's going to bring some awesome stuff next week. And so it's going to be a good time. But appreciate everyone listening, commenting, being a part of this all throughout. Thanks for all your comments. I know Zachary's got a few more things here. A few more people literally keep saying, "Good point, Leroy. Good job, Leroy." I don't know what it is about.
Leroy got some things.
You know what it is? I just kept telling all my friends, y'all need to come in and pump me up. Just come pump me up.
No, this isn't your friends, man. These are like random people from YouTube and stuff, and just people that are new. I see watching here. So unless you've really got some secret friends out there. So anyway, whatever reason, this is Leroy's show now, and
secret friends.
Secret
friends.
Yeah, secret friends. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, Take care, you guys. See everybody. We'll be back next week. We should be at our regular time next week, 5 o'clock. After this, I'm doing another show at 6. That's why I had to kind of transform today to a different time, but we should be back 5 next Saturday. So take care. God bless everyone.
All right.